In the year 73, a remnant of Jewish zealots reportedly lost their stand against the mighty Roman Empire atop the rocky fortress known as Masada. For several months, the tiny group successfully held off being captured, but knowing their defeat was inevitable, they chose to take one another's lives rather than concede to their loss of sovereignty as a nation and a people. For over 1,800 years, the world viewed their stand as heroic, but their sacrifice a result of hopelessness, until the archaeological discoveries of the 1930s, when a portion of Hebrew scripture identified as Ezekiel 37 was uncovered in the ruins of the Masada synagogue. Oddly separated from the rest of the scroll, it was the conclusion of archaeologists that those verses may have been what the band of rebels were reading before their struggle ended.
Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord.
Like the Jews of Masada, generations of Jews have held to the hope in those verses that one day the descendants of Jacob would return to the land and their beloved nation would be revived. But like the portion of Ezekiel that was hidden in the Masada ruins for nearly 2,000 years, so was the hope of returning to their homeland. The Romans were just the first of many nations determined to scatter the Jews around the world and wipe out all remembrance of their land, their language, and their God. Suffering under Gentile rule, the land languished due to centuries of neglect and ecological abuse, turning this once fertile country into a vast wasteland. Mark Twain recorded in 1867 in his book, Innocents Abroad, just how barren and dry and empty the land had become.
The desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We reached Tabor safely. We never saw a human being on the whole journey.
Without a homeland, the Jewish people struggled to flourish as well. For centuries, no matter what nation they found themselves in, they were eventually persecuted, oppressed, and even slaughtered for their faith. But by the late 1800s, the promise and plan of God was beginning to stir. Without any natural reason for inspiration, a burning desire began to rise among Jews all over the world to return to the promised land. The wind of the Spirit was beginning to blow across the dry bones of Ezekiel 37. One by one, those bones began to rattle. One of those bones was young reporter Theodor Herzl, who often sat in the coffee shops of Vienna listening to the political debates of the late 19th century. Herzl was shocked by the anti-Semitism that was rising, and he feared for the future of Jews in Europe. Expressing his thoughts in a simple pamphlet, he proposed the idea of establishing a Jewish state. Without the availability of modern communication or the support of any body of people, somehow the ideas in that little pamphlet began to connect one dry bone to another, and the Zionist movement emerged. In 1897, the first Zionist conference was held in Basel, Switzerland. There, Theodor Herzl wrote in his diary,
"At Basel, I founded the Jewish state."
Unknown to Herzl, another one of those bones was springing to life. fellow European Jew, Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer knew no nation could survive without a common language to hold it together. As that wind blew across his life, Eliezer became consumed with the idea of reviving Hebrew from a language of antiquity to a vital, living, spoken language, complete with modern terms and expressions. He moved from the beauty of Europe to a harsh, rugged life in the land now called Palestine, refusing for his family or himself to speak any language other than Hebrew. In spite of sickness and extreme poverty, Eliezer dedicated his life to writing the first modern-day Hebrew dictionary and inspired a disjointed and despairing people to a place of newfound national identity. Even though they were without a land to call their own, the Zionist movement continued to grow and even became the foundation for political organization. The premonitions of men like Theodor Herzl and Eliezer ben Yehuda were far more accurate than they dared to believe. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, persecution of the Jews continued to escalate, with anti-Semitism spreading like a fever across Russia and Europe. Things briefly looked hopeful at the conclusion of World War I. Britain had wrested control of Palestine, and with the Balfour Declaration, proposed to give much of the land to the Jews. But under international and Arab pressure, they failed to follow through, and instead further oppressed the remnant of Jews already living in the land, and through quotas, limited the number of Jews allowed to come home. Then came Hitler's march across Europe. His final solution began with social and political segregation, but culminated in the deaths of over 6 million European Jews. Before it could be stopped, whole families and entire communities were wiped out. Even at the close of World War II, instead of freedom, many of the surviving Jews found themselves homeless, unwanted, and with no place to go. Even America and Canada, who had refused to receive many of those fleeing Hitler's death machine, were reluctant to get involved. But finally, in 1948, when it looked like there was no hope, the United Nations held perhaps its most historic vote ever.
South Africa? Yes.
Soviet Union? Yes. United Kingdom? Abstain?
Yes.
United States?
Venezuela?
Yes.
Yes. Yemen? No. Yugoslavia? Abstain.
The resolution of the Dutch Committee
On Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
Six months from now, in May 1948, the British mandate will end. And 50 years after Herzl, it will no longer be a dream.
Following that monumental vote, at midnight on May 14, 1948, the Provisional Government of Israel proclaimed the new State of Israel.
הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. בתוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
On that same day, President Harry Truman recognized the Jewish government as the de facto authority of the new Jewish state. Ezekiel's dry bones had not only come together, but now they were covered with flesh.
In our revival, we have been inspired by the message of our Bible and by the traditions of our ancient history, which elevate the dignity of man and the principle of justice, and which command us to love our neighbor.
1948 was not the end of the Jewish struggle. Even on their first day of independence, they were attacked by a coalition of Arab states which refused to accept that Israel had a right to exist. In the 60 years that have followed, nothing much has changed. Israel has fought 3 wars on its own soil and lived constantly under missile barrage and terrorist attacks. This tiny nation of 5.5 million Jews is surrounded by 300 million Muslim neighbors who want nothing more than to push them off their land and into the sea. Yet the rest of the world continues to insist they relinquish more and more of their historic homeland. But in spite of world opposition, Israel has continued to flourish as a garden in the desert, with a population that would compare in size to Dallas-Fort Worth. This nation has become not just world players, but world leaders in international business, technological innovation, medical discoveries, education, and agriculture. Its $100 billion economy is larger than all its neighbors combined. This reuniting of the land, the language, and the people of Israel is arguably the greatest miracle of our modern day. Though some may watch this divine renewal with anger and condemnation, we are fervently pressing to be among those who bless the handiwork of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We want to be in the forefront of those who are willing to stand without shame or fear and proclaim to all the world that Israel belongs to His covenant people, the Jews, and they have come home.